Close your eyes and picture Rome. What do you see? Do you see the Colosseum?
Do you see the legions marching in perfect unison? An unstoppable force? Or emperors draped in purple silk, ruling the world from marble palaces? Forget all of that!
Because for the first 500 years of its history, Rome was none of those things. Rome began as a crime scene, a muddy village of outcasts, bandits, and runaway slaves. This was the 8th century BC, a time of chaos.
It was surrounded by enemies who were richer, stronger, and more civilized.
Rome had nothing but mud, myths, and stubbornness.
So here is the mystery. How did this specific village survive? Hundreds of others vanished. They were burned, enslaved, or forgotten. But Rome didn't die.
Before Rome conquered the world, it had to win the battle for survival. This is the story of Rome before the empire.
To understand Rome's rise, we first have to look at the map of Italy around the 8th century BC.
Italy was not a country. It was a chaotic battle royale, a patchwork of peoples, languages, and rival cultures.
If you were a betting man back then, you would never put your money on the Romans.
To the north, you had the Etruscans. These were the heavyweights.
They were mysterious, incredibly wealthy, and technologically advanced.
They built cities, drained swamps, and traded with the East, while Romans were still living in huts. Their armies wore heavy armor that the early Romans could only dream of.
To the south, the coast was dotted with Greek colonies. This was Magna Graecia. Cities like Naples and Syracuse were powerhouses of philosophy, art, and war.
They were the superpowers of the day. Intellectual and cultural giants.
And they possessed naval power that controlled the entire Mediterranean.
And squeezed in the middle, the Latins.
A loose collection of shepherds and farmers living in simple huts.
They were constantly fighting each other for grazing land and stolen cattle.
Rome was just one of these tiny, insignificant dots.
Rome wasn't even a city yet. It was a collection of separate villages on top of hills, separated by marshland.
No one looked at this place and thought, "This is the future."
In fact, most neighbors probably looked at Rome and thought, that place will be gone in 50 years.
So why didn't they disappear? The first reason wasn't courage. It was geography. Rome was founded on the banks of the Tiber River, about 25 kilometers inland from the sea. This specific distance was a stroke of genius, or luck.
Coastal cities were rich, but they were sitting ducks for pirates.
Raiders could land, burn a city, and leave before an army could arrive.
Rome was far enough inland to be safe from surprise naval attacks.
But it was close enough to the river to float goods down to the sea. They were connected to the world, but protected from it. Crucially, Rome controlled Tiber Island. This was the ford, the only place for miles where you could easily cross the river. If you wanted to trade salt, the most valuable preservative of the ancient world, you had to pass through Rome. This became known as the Via Salaria, the Salt Road.
Rome sat on the toll booth. Every sack of salt meant money for the city.
And then there were the hills, the famous 7 hills. These weren't just scenic spots. They were natural fortresses.
When enemies attacked, the farmers retreated up the steep slopes where they could throw rocks down.
The valleys between them were swamps, filled with malaria. This actually acted as a defense line. Invading armies would get sick if they stayed too long.
Rome wasn't rich, but it was incredibly annoying to conquer.
But a good location is useless without leadership. For the first 250 years, Rome was a monarchy. Tradition speaks of 7 kings. Some were Roman, some Sabine, and some were outsiders.
The first, Romulus, is likely a myth, but the later kings, they were very real.
The last 3 kings were likely Etruscans. Rome was essentially ruled by its sophisticated neighbors.
This foreign rule was a humiliation, but it was also a blessing in disguise. The Etruscan kings transformed Rome from a village of huts into a true city. They ordered the construction of the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer.
It was a massive engineering project. They drained the marshes between the hills.
This created the dry land that would become the Roman Forum.
Think about that. The center of the Roman Empire was built on a drained swamp.
They also brought the symbols of power that we associate with Rome today. And the fasces, a bundle of rods bound around an axe. This symbol meant, together we are strong, apart we are brittle. They brought religious rituals, how to read the sky, how to organize the gods. Rome didn't reject these foreign ideas. They stole them.
They absorbed the religion, the architecture, and the military tactics. This became Rome's superpower, assimilation.
But while the city grew, the people were divided. Early Rome was a rigid caste system. On one side, the patricians, the elite families who held all the religious and political power. On the other, the plebeians, the commoners, farmers, and laborers.
These people had no political power, but they carried the military burden.
You are called to fight a war every summer. You buy your own armor. You risk your life.
You fall into debt. The patrician you borrowed money from now threatens to sell you into slavery.
Tension reached a boiling point in 494 BC.
War was coming. The patricians needed soldiers. But the plebeians did something that changed history.
They didn't fight. They didn't riot. They simply left. They marched out of Rome and camped on a nearby hill, the Sacred Mount.
They went on strike. Without the plebeians, Rome was paralyzed.
No army, no workers, no bread. The patricians panicked.
They realized they couldn't run the city alone. They were forced to negotiate.
This led to a historic compromise. Rome didn't crush the rebels, it integrated them.
They created the tribune of the plebs, an official elected by the people.
Veto!
He had the power of veto. He could stop any law that hurt the common people. His body was sacrosanct. If anyone touched him, they could be killed legally.
While Greek cities were destroying themselves with civil wars, Rome found a way to share power. The city survived not because it was peaceful, but because it adapted under pressure. Rome was learning something crucial. Power without inclusion creates instability.
Pressure didn't break Rome. It hardened it.
With the city internally stable, Rome looked outward. They didn't start by conquering continents. It started by fighting neighbors. Every few years, a border dispute, a stolen herd, a broken treaty. Most wars were small, brutal, and personal. Rome fought the Latins, the Sabines, and the Etruscans. But Rome developed one habit early: never fight alone.
Rome made alliances, then defended allies, then absorbed them.
Victory didn't mean destruction. It meant integration. The army kept growing. This was the Latin League,
A confederation led by Rome.
Initially, Rome fought like the Greeks, using the phalanx, a massive wall of spears. It was great on flat ground, but Italy is mountainous. On rough terrain, the phalanx broke apart.
So Rome reinvented warfare. They created the Maniple system, a checkerboard formation with gaps. While others were rigid, Rome was fluid. If a line buckled, reserves could step into the gaps. This allowed them to rotate troops. The enemy was always fighting a fresh Roman, while they got tired. They adopted the tall shield, the scutum, which covered the whole body. Survival came first. But military power means nothing if the government is corrupt. We need to go back to 509 BC.
The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, ruled as a tyrant. He killed senators and ignored the laws.
The spark of revolution was a tragedy involving a noblewoman named Lucretia. Her suffering ignited the city.
Led by Brutus, the Romans rose up. They didn't just kill the king, they abolished the idea of kings. They drove Tarquin out and locked the gates. Rome was free.
They swore a blood oath. Anyone who tried to make himself king would be killed on sight.
They created the Republic. Res Publica,
the public affair.
Rome replaced kings with consuls. 2 rulers, not 1.
And crucially, they only served for 1 year. Power was temporary.
Rome learned to fear absolute power. The whole system was built on paranoia. The ideal Roman wasn't a conqueror, but a farmer like Cincinnatus, someone who served, then went home. He was given absolute power to save Rome, did the job in 15 days, and gave it all back.
But a republic needs more than just leaders. It needs rules. Early Roman law was a secret. Only the priests knew the rules, and they could change them to suit their friends.
Imagine playing a game where only your opponent knows the rules. That was life for a plebeian.
So they demanded the 12 tables, laws written down, carved in bronze, and displayed in the forum.
This was revolutionary. For the first time, citizens knew their rights. Schoolboys had to memorize them. It became the backbone of Roman identity.
Others were harsh. If a father sells his son into slavery 3 times, the son becomes free.
Rome wasn't always fair, but it was predictable, and predictability builds loyalty.
But just as Rome was getting organized, disaster struck. The apocalypse came from the north.
Gauls, led by the warlord Brennus. They smashed the Roman army and entered the city.
In 390 BC, Rome was sacked, burned to the ground. The records were destroyed.
When Romans complained about the ransom weight, Brennus threw his sword on the scale and said,
Vae victis! Woe to the conquered!
Most cities would have died here. Rome didn't. They paid the gold, watched the Gauls leave, and then they got to work.
They built the Servian Wall, massive stone fortifications. They vowed, no one will ever sack Rome again.
They reformed the army. Better weapons, better tactics. The disaster made them stronger. For the next 50 years, they fought the Samnites, tough mountain warriors.
They suffered humiliations, like at the Caudine Forks, where an entire army was forced to surrender.
But Rome had infinite resilience. You could beat them in a battle, but you couldn't beat them in a war.
To defeat the mountains, they built roads. The Appian Way, the queen of roads.
Roads weren't just for trade. There were weapons. Rome could move armies faster than anyone else.
They planted colonies, mini-Romes, all over Italy to secure the land.
Even the Greeks couldn't stop them. King Pyrrhus beat the Romans twice, but lost so many men, he said, "One more victory and I am undone."
Rome's superpower was manpower. They could replace losses. Their enemies couldn't.
By 264 BC, the patchwork was gone. Italy was Roman. So we returned to our original question. Why Rome? Because they copied instead of rejecting. Because they included instead of exterminating. Because they built systems, not just heroes.
Rome didn't rely on a single genius king. They built a machine that could run without a driver.
Rome didn't chase glory early. It chased survival. And survival built the habits of empire. But now, having conquered Italy, they stood at the water's edge. And across the water, the true master of the Mediterranean was waiting. To the Romans, the world ended at the water's edge. But to the Carthaginians, the water was a highway. Carthage was the richest city on earth. Merchants, sailors, masters of the sea.
It was the elephant versus the whale. Rome was the master of land. Carthage was the master of the sea.
The collision was inevitable. The spark happened in Sicily.
Rome had no navy. They didn't know how to build big ships, so naturally they stole the design from a wrecked enemy ship.
They turned a sea battle into a land battle. They refused to play by the enemy's rules.
Before we end, we must understand one thing. Rome didn't plan this.
Historians call it defensive imperialism. Rome expanded not because they wanted land, but because they wanted safety.
They conquered their neighbors so their neighbors couldn't conquer them. It was an empire built on fear.
The empire wasn't an accident of luck. It was the result of systems, roads, laws, alliances, adaptability. Rome before the empire was not powerful. It was cautious, flexible, ruthless.
Empires aren't born from ambition alone. They're born from systems built to survive chaos. And Rome mastered survival long before it mastered conquest.
But in Carthage, a 9-year-old boy is swearing a blood oath.
His name is Hannibal Barca, and he is coming to break Rome.
If you want the story of how Rome faced its apocalypse,
watch the next episode, How the Roman Empire Really Expanded.
Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the war.